The guest room is where you belong. Patricia smirked, her perfectly manicured hand gesturing toward the smallest bedroom in the house. We wouldn't want you getting too comfortable in the master suite, would we? My name is Emma, and at 35, I was standing in the foyer of a house that had been mine for the past 15 years, being treated like an unwanted visitor by my mother-in-law. The irony would have been comical if it wasn't so infuriating. But Mom, my husband Michael started, only to be cut off by Patricia's sharp glare. Michael, darling, your father and I have lived here for decades. We know what's best for this house and everyone in it. She turned to me, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Emma dear, you understand, don't you? Family traditions must be respected. Family traditions. That's what Patricia called her constant need to control everything and everyone around her. The same traditions that had her redecorating my kitchen without asking, rearranging my garden beds, and now trying to regulate which rooms we could use in my own house. You see, 15 years ago, when I was just 20, I inherited this beautiful Victorian home from my grandmother. She had been my rock, my confidant, and the only person who truly believed in me when everyone else saw just another small-town girl with big dreams. The house needs someone who'll love it as much as I do, she told me before she passed. Someone who'll understand its soul. I never told anyone about the inheritance, not even Michael when we started dating 5 years later. By then, Patricia and George, my father-in-law, had been living here as tenants for years. My grandmother had given them an incredibly generous lease agreement, and I decided to honor it. I kept collecting their modest rent through a property management company, remaining anonymous. But now, watching Patricia treat me like an intruder in my own home, I wondered if I'd made a mistake keeping this secret for so long. Actually, I began, but Michael squeezed my hand, silently pleading with me to keep the peace. That's how it always went. Patricia would overstep, and everyone would tiptoe around her feelings. The guest room has such lovely morning light, Patricia continued, oblivious to my internal struggle. Perfect for someone who's just visiting. Just visiting. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Michael and I had moved in last week after our apartment lease ended, planning to save money for our own place. At least that's what Michael thought. I hadn't told him yet that we already had our own place. This one. That evening, as I unpacked our belongings in the cramped guest room, I could hear Patricia on the phone in the garden, probably talking to her sister Diana. Can you believe it? She actually thought they could take the master bedroom. I had to remind her of her place. After all, George and I have poured our hearts into this house. It's practically ours. I closed my eyes, remembering my grandmother's words about the house's soul. Patricia might have lived here for years, but she had never understood what made this place special. To her, it was just another possession to control, another way to assert her dominance. Michael found me sitting on the guest bed, surrounded by unpacked boxes. I'm sorry about Mom, he said, sitting beside me. She's just set in her ways. I looked at my husband, this kind man who always tried to keep the peace, who never stood up to his mother because he thought that's what love meant. Michael, I said carefully, what if I told you there's something about this house you should know? But before I could continue, Patricia's voice rang through the hallway. Michael, could you help your father with the garage door? It's sticking again. He gave me an apologetic smile and left, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a decision to make. The property deed was in my bag, just waiting to be revealed. 15 years of silence weighed against Patricia's latest power play. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow, I would tell them all the truth. Let them see who really belonged in the guest room. As I got ready for bed, I heard Patricia's voice one last time, drifting up from downstairs. Don't worry, Diana. I'll make sure they know their place. After all, this is my house. I smiled to myself in the darkness. Patricia had no idea how wrong she was, but she was about to find out. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Patricia rearranging my carefully unpacked belongings in the hallway. These family photos simply won't do, she muttered, taking down the pictures Michael and I had hung yesterday. This is a formal space, not some college dormitory. I stood there in my pajamas, watching her replace our wedding photos with her own family portraits. Each thud of our frames being set on the floor felt like a deliberate provocation. Michael had already left for work, leaving me alone to deal with his mother's latest power play. Oh, Emma, Patricia said, noticing me. Good, you're up. I've taken the liberty of making some necessary changes. This house has a certain standard to maintain. I walked to my bag and pulled out a folder I've been keeping for 15 years. Actually, Patricia, we need to talk about the house. She waved her hand dismissively. If this is about the master bedroom again, I thought I made myself clear. George and I have lived here for 15 years, I interrupted, opening the folder. Yes, I know exactly how long you've been here. Something in my tone made her pause. For the first time since I'd known her, Patricia looked uncertain. What do you mean? I pulled out the property deed, my name clearly visible at the top. This house belonged to my grandmother, Margaret Sullivan. When she passed away 15 years ago, she left it to me. Patricia's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, anger. That's impossible. We've been paying rent to Sterling Property Management all these years. Yes, I said calmly, my property management company. I kept the arrangement my grandmother had with you because it seemed like the right thing to do. But I never expected you to treat me like an unwanted guest in my own home. She grabbed the deed from my hands, her fingers trembling as she read it. Why didn't you say anything all these years? Would it have made a difference? I asked. Would you have treated me any better if you'd known? The sound of the front door opening interrupted us. George walked in, returning from his morning walk. Patricia, what's going on? His wife thrust the deed at him. Did you know about this? Did you know we've been living in her house all this time? George adjusted his glasses, reading the document carefully. Unlike his wife, a look of understanding crossed his face. Margaret's granddaughter. Of course, she always spoke so fondly of you. You knew. Patricia's voice rose an octave. I suspected, George said quietly. Margaret mentioned leaving the house to her granddaughter. I just didn't realize it was Emma until now. Patricia sank into a nearby chair, our wedding photo still clutched in her hand. All these years I've been in your house. Yes, I said, taking our photo from her and hanging it back on the wall. And you can continue to live here, Patricia. All I ask is that you remember whose home this really is. The front door opened again, and Michael walked in, having forgotten some paperwork. He stopped short at the scene before him. His mother sitting shell-shocked in a chair, his father holding a property deed, and me calmly hanging photos back on the wall. What's going on? He asked, looking between us. I took a deep breath. Michael, there's something I need to tell you about this house. George touched his son's shoulder. Perhaps we should all sit down for this conversation. Patricia remained unusually quiet as we gathered in the living room, the property deed now lying on the coffee table between us. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows my grandmother had loved so much, casting colorful patterns across the floor. The time had come to tell them everything. About my grandmother, about the inheritance, and about why I kept it secret for so long. As I looked at their faces, I wondered how this revelation would change everything. Michael picked up the deed, his eyes widening as he read it. Emma, why didn't you tell me? The hurt in his voice was exactly what I feared all these years. But before I could respond, George spoke up. Your grandmother was an extraordinary woman, Emma. She loved this house, but more importantly, she loved you. I remember her talking about how you were the only one who truly understood this place's character. Patricia's head snapped up, a new realization dawning on her face. All those times I'd objected to her changes, her redecorating, her rearranging. It wasn't just about personal taste. I was trying to preserve my grandmother's legacy. The clock on the mantel chimed 10, and Michael glanced at his watch. I'm late for work, but this conversation isn't over. We all need to talk about this. As he stood to leave, Patricia finally found her voice. The guest room, she said quietly. I put you in the guest room of your own house. Yes, I replied, you did. The magnitude of her actions over the years seemed to be sinking in. Every dismissive comment, every controlling gesture, every time she treated me like an outsider, all of it had been in my house. Michael left for work, leaving me with his parents and 15 years of unspoken truths. The question now was, where did we go from here? That evening, over a tense dinner in the formal dining room, we finally had the conversation that was 15 years overdue. Michael had come home early, his mind clearly preoccupied with the morning's revelation. I still can't believe you never told me, he said, pushing his food around his plate. All those times we talked about saving for a house. I reached for his hand across the table. I wanted to tell you so many times. But at first, I was worried you feel obligated to move in before we were ready. Then, after we got married, it just became more complicated. Patricia, who had been uncharacteristically quiet all day, set down her fork. Because of me, she said softly, you were worried about how I would react. The admission hung in the air between us. For the first time since I'd known her, Patricia seemed genuinely reflective. You remember when you first moved in here? I asked her. My grandmother told me how excited you were about the garden. Patricia's eyes softened. Margaret was so kind to us. When no one else would rent to a family with 3 teenagers, she gave us a chance. This house. She paused, looking around the room. It became our fresh start. That's why I kept the arrangement, I explained. Grandmother always said this house had a way of helping people who needed it. I didn't want to disrupt that. George, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. But we disrupted you instead. Especially Patricia. He gave his wife a meaningful look. We forgot what it was like to be on the other side. Michael squeezed my hand. Why now? Why tell us today? I took a deep breath. Because I'm pregnant. The words caused an immediate reaction. Michael's eyes widened with joy. George broke into a warm smile, and Patricia burst into tears. A baby, she sobbed. And I've been treating the mother of my grandchild like an intruder in her own home. The master bedroom, George said suddenly. That's why you wanted it. You're preparing for the baby. I nodded. I wanted to start converting the smaller room into a nursery, but I knew I couldn't do that without explaining everything. Patricia stood up abruptly and left the room. We all watched her go, uncertain whether to follow. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a large leather-bound book. Margaret gave me this when we first moved in, she said, placing it on the table. It's the house's original blueprints and history. I always thought she gave it to me because I expressed interest, but now I realize she looked at me meaningfully. She was just keeping it safe for you. Opening the book revealed detailed drawings of the house, along with photographs documenting its transformation over the years. My grandmother had added her own notes in the margins, including one that made my heart skip. For Emma, who will understand. We should move out, Patricia announced suddenly. Find our own place. No, I said firmly. This house is big enough for all of us. It always has been. We just need to learn to live in it together. Michael looked at me with pride. Are you sure? On one condition, I added, turning to Patricia. No more treating me like a guest. This is my home, but it can be our home too. All of us. Patricia nodded, wiping her eyes. The master bedroom is yours. And she hesitated. I'd like to help with the nursery if he'll let me. Not taking over, she added quickly, just helping. Over the next few weeks, a remarkable transformation took place. Patricia channeled her controlling nature into organizing the most detailed baby preparation plan I'd ever seen, but always checking with me first. George spent weekends teaching Michael about the house's quirks and maintenance needs, knowledge he'd accumulated over 15 years. The guest room, which had been a source of so much tension, became a beautiful nursery. Patricia surprised us all by recreating the exact shade of yellow my grandmother had used in my childhood room, a detail she'd apparently remembered from one of Margaret's stories. One morning, as I sat in the garden drinking tea, Patricia joined me with an old photo album. I found these yesterday, she said, showing me pictures of the house from when they first moved in. Margaret took them. She always said the house chose its family. I never understood what she meant until now. I smiled, resting my hand on my growing belly. The house didn't just choose one family. It chose all of us. Patricia reached over and squeezed my hand. Thank you, she said, for not giving up on us, for giving me a chance to be better. As we sat there, surrounded by the garden my grandmother had loved, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Sometimes the greatest acts of love aren't in the grand gestures, but in the quiet choice to give people room to grow, to change, to become better versions of themselves. The house had known that all along. It just took us